And welcome back to KTN Sunday Night. It's time for Checkpoint. The South China Morning Post this week reported of the nuptials between Kenya and China. The two countries exchanged vows of friendship and spoke of a widening economic and political cooperation. Agreements worth 425 billion shillings were signed with China on Monday. Now, certainly there is value in Kenya expanding her traditional friendships and seeking to create new ones. But advice from U.S. President Barack Obama offered on his Africa tour in June is also worth remembering. He said, make sure it's a good deal for Africa in reference to foreign interests here. So tonight on Checkpoint, we are asking, is China offering Kenya a good deal? Joining us now to discuss the Eastern Dragon is strategist Moses Kuria to my immediate right, just back from Beijing, and our in-house political analyst, Professor Edward Kisiangani, seated to my far right. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
Moses, how was China?
Well, I think China was eye-opening. I think it is amazing how the miracle that is China has been kept from our forefront for such a long time. I think it was purely an eye-opening experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's interesting you refer to China as a miracle. Certainly their development is worth taking note of, but part of that, Professor, has been attributed to far less than a miracle, actually currency manipulation.
I think the miracle that Moses Kuria is talking about is the miracle of finding out that there's a country in this world that has banned Twitter. There is no Facebook, and that is the miracle he saw. I think if he used his own money to travel to China to watch that, that's the miracle he saw. But basically, if you look at China today, it has literally vetoed every other resolution in the UN Security Council that wants to restore good governance in this world. Any country, including Iran and Iraq, it has never been positive. Of course, its foreign policy is based on about 5 principles: the principle of mutual respect, of territorial integrity, the principle of equality, non-interference, and non-aggression. Look at the case that we have had in Africa, like the one in Darfur, the case that we have had in Rwanda. If you don't want to interfere and human beings are killed in a country like Egypt and you don't want to interfere, you are courting genocide. So that is how selfish China is. And then secondly, you have to understand, and my friend Kuria, that in the 70s and 60s, when Jomo Kenyatta was the president of this country, before we had a big engagement with China, there was literally nothing like counterfeit goods. All the counterfeit goods that we have had, where you buy a cover for a mobile phone which looks genuine and it's wrapped the following day, come from China. And China has been the market for our contraband. The ivory that is a result of poaching in this country has come from China. So somebody say the market is in China. So somebody has to tell this to the world. Conventional wisdom teaches us that when you show me his friend or her friend and I can describe the person, if the president, the Kenya government is doing business with China, what is the deal? 425 billion shillings Kenyan money. What is the deal? Is it coming to be discussed here? And who is going to pay this money? We have not heard about that.
All right, we will get back to the nitty-gritties of that deal, Professor. Just hang on for a bit, but I want to take you back, because what you're saying is Kenyans should be concerned that we are doing business with a country with an appalling human rights record, etc. But Moses, there is the other side of the argument, and this was disclosed by a certain AU official, and he said, if you want to talk endlessly about democracy, rights, etc., and do that banter, then talk to the West. But if you want concrete, go to China. Do you think trade and development is taking precedence over perhaps these quote-unquote softer issues of what exactly is democracy, what exactly is good governance?
I think China is a country of 1.5 billion people. By any standards, that's a huge market, and any sensible person should see the 1.5 billion people before seeing the other things. Because wait a minute, I mean, United States of America is the so-called high priest of democracy and human rights, and those are the kind of vapor that people like Kisiangani likes living on. But America is today borrowing a lot of money from China. China is the biggest donor to the United States. 22% of all the foreign borrowing by United States government, a whole 1.7 billion out of 5.2 trillion, trillion is held in terms of US bonds and treasury bills by China. So if America, the so-called high priest of human rights, is borrowing money from China, who is Kisiangani?
I mean, we are not. I'm not here as a defender of the United States. America is not borrowing money from China. You must tell the people the truth. It is giving trade concessions which enable Chinese goods to do business on American market.
No, Professor.
Yes, when you talk about borrowing, it's like America is going to a bank in China and asking, give us some money. That is not the point.
Can I surprise you? That is what is happening.
No.
It is going and borrowing money, using some instrument called bonds, if you have never heard of them.
Yes, but when you are talking about bonds,
it is borrowing.
They are quantified in terms of the kind of goods that you want to have on the Chinese
Prof,
market.
I think let's not belabor the point. America, just like Kenya, is very much in debt into China. In fact, if something was to go wrong with that economy, the United States of A, as we know it, may not be the same thing. But let's progress the argument. And it's interesting that you've talked about America being the so-called high priest. And Prof, one wonders, and it's a valid question, what is Kenya to do in terms of dealing with the West? We've seen what their policy as far as democracy is concerned. If it's not democracy, their style, with the kind of leaders that they want, then you may very well have an Egypt situation on your hands, which is a genuine concern. But on the other, here we have the Far East that does not support issues where we've traditionally failed, which is democracy and good governance. Where should Kenya go?
Yes, we are not saying that Kenya should not do business with China. We're saying that when Kenya does business with China, it asks China to stop approving contraband goods coming into our country. It should stop being a market, 1.5 billion people, being a market for our ivory, for our elephants, from our elephants. It has not put into place certain trade barriers that can stop this smuggling. So we are saying that we can do business with it, but we can do business when they are giving us genuine goods. Then the second thing that we need to look at is the democratic part of it. The West has also in the past one time supported regimes that are bad in Africa, and in fact one of them is Mobutu Sese Seko in the past. That is correct, but we don't think that that is an excuse for certain regimes in Africa also to do business with China, and for China also to overlook the problems that are taking place in Africa. So China is doing business without questioning the morality of that business in China, in Africa, with the rogue regimes, dictatorial regimes. The Kenyan the regime has not yet become dictatorial. But when it continues, you know, like you call them nuptials, it is still doing business and still moving closer to China. 425 billion shillings earned. If you compare with the kind of money that the diaspora brings in this country, probably 1 billion shillings brought by the people who live in the American diaspora in this country. What is that? 20% of that money is what the president borrowed, and that's what we shall get for 1 year. What is the interest rate of that money? So if you gave Kenyans a chance to make a choice, would they want to live in America or Britain?
So you're
or
saying
anything?
round one, remember it was his first trip there, round one, 425B, not a good enough deal.
It is not even a deal, because what are the terms? How long shall we? How long are we going to take to pay this money? Maybe Moses Kuria can tell us. And you know, we have said so many things about the Jubilee government. He might have communicated to them what we really don't like about Jubilee government, and let him now tell us what were the terms of trade. How much are we going to pay?
You know, I don't care how much you're going to pay. All I care
You should
for,
care.
You don't? Your children and your children's children will be in debt. Right now, that's at 1 trillion. Half of it owed to China.
No. Look, let's stop this voodoo economics. What I care for is that from Malaba, from Mombasa all the way to Malaba, we are going to have a new railway line. We've never constructed a kilometer, not even one piece of metal of a railway since 1901. For the first time in 114 years, we are going to have a new railway line coming from Mombasa all the way to Malaba, so that we can be able to foster regional trade, so that my children, even as they are paying for those loans, can be able to live in an economy that's producing even more.
This is because it's your children and not you paying. But maybe this is something you would care about, the balance of trade between the two countries. Let me just read out to you some of the figures. China's exports to Kenya pegged at 249 billion. That was in 2011. Compare that with Kenya's exports to China, a depressing 4.6 billion. And the balance of trade certainly is what will tell us whether this relationship will last. Did anything come out of those conversations, Moses, that said this is what China is going to do to try and put this on a near level playing field?
You know, when people talk about 425 billion shillings that was signed on a government-to-government level, you've got to remember that there were 80 Kenyan companies as part of that delegation, and they were meeting their counterparts from China, because it's not.
They didn't have to travel to China to meet them. They should have talked to from Nairobi.
Well, you didn't provide them with Skype, so let's just stick to the fact
there
that
is no Twitter and Facebook in China.
Yeah, but the issue is that the private sector that traveled with the president to China, of course they must have investigated and explored ways of business-to-business sort of relationship between Kenya and China. Of course, the issue of balance of trade between Kenya and China is of concern, but you've got to remember, because of our over obsession over the years with the facing West, we forgot about developing alternative markets. So when we think about our tea, when we think about our horticulture, we think about our coffee, we only saw one market, that's the West. Now look at tourism, for example, that the amount of neo-millionaires that are getting into the Chinese economy every year is staggering, and those are the people that we need to be targeted so that they can be able to come here and spend it.
So Moses, are we looking for money alone? Are we looking for money alone, or we also want to get some model from China, especially with regard to governance?
Very good question. I think for me it is actually about the model, Professor. It's not just the money. As I said, it's about the money, it's about business-to-business contacts, and most importantly, it's about studying that path to development. Yeah, that there's one village that actually the delegation was able to visit in the middle of China, a village with its own industry, so that they're not even the people are employed by industries which they own and which generates power on itself as a village, 100 megawatts of power. Kenya is only 1,600 megawatts, the whole country. So if a small village in China can be able to generate power, have its own industries, have its own residential, properties, we have got so many lessons that we can learn from China in terms of development.
Moses, let me cut in there. There's the trade part of it that we've discussed quite well, but there are those who say this wasn't so much about the business, but more about finding friends in high places, i.e. the UN Security Council with permanent membership that could protect the interests of the president and the deputy president as this ICC case proceeds.
I think that is a brilliant reasoning. If you look at that, the Kenya first of all wants a permanent seat in a seat in the Security Council, and it is not likely to get support from the West, because the people who are lobbying have a case at the ICC, and it might not excite anybody in the West. So what is happening is that China would always like it to be the opposite camp. And that is correct. That interpretation is correct. It is probably Kenya wants to get there in the UN, and then, of course, this case at ICC has already been politicized beyond any imagination. So once it gets that, it can lobby to change rules and probably have people who are indicted in the ICC come out. That is possible, and that probably could be a strategy. But I don't think we can forget the point that Africa has been suffering from what you call the dependence syndrome. This dependence syndrome has been there. You don't need to read any book, but you know very well that from the 60s up to now we have had this dependence syndrome, and really it was caused by the West. So the alternative to this dependency is not to bring up another country which will continue with the dependence syndrome, only this time that that country has this name called China. So we must interrogate this and come out of it. The alternative to this dependence is not to go to China, but to look it is to look at our domestic resources and say, you remember one time during the reign of President Kibaki, he came up with a policy that we were able to finance our own budget, probably three-quarters of the budget from the local resources. So we must build local. We should not overborrow, because even if you put up a railway, it could be a white elephant where my own mother and your mother can just be looking at it, but it benefits you nothing. The foreigners are owning the railway, and in the long run, they pay, the children pay, the grandchildren pay, but it will be there, but it will be a Chinese railway operating in Kenya. This is something that Moses should think about. On dependency,
and also the question of whether China is really just a neo-colonial power that is out to plunder our resources.
Let me start with the ICC, because Professor has answered that one.
Sure, go ahead.
China is in Zimbabwe, it is in Malawi, it is in Tanzania, it is in Uganda, and I'm not sure that those countries have got matters at the ICC. So I don't know where the ICC is coming from. Secondly, even if...
Well, it comes from the fact that we are at the ICC.
So should we wait until we finish with ICC before dealing with China? Are you suggesting that in any way?
No, I'm asking a question.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's why I find the question preposterous. Because
no, you should answer honest question.
No, I find it misplaced question because...
It isn't a misplaced question. You have asked, where is the question of the ICC coming in? Yeah. It comes in the reference to the fact that Kenya's president and deputy president are at the ICC. China and Russia, the two countries that the president chose to visit outside of any other, in fact, after going to London, are countries that are known to have taken a hard left when the West goes right.
No, let me say something about the ICC. Now, this is my very personal opinion. The ICC is neither here nor there. It's actually thin air. It'll crash like a house of cards. So I don't think that anybody would even place it on top of any agenda.
You have no point.
Well,
you have no point.
Professor, a point.
Say something else.
You
have jet lag.
No.
You cannot say that it's nothing. It's thin air.
No, this is not there.
Institution.
No, I mean it only appears in a figment of your imagination, Professor.
Probably.
ICC will collapse and it will not start thinking about another agenda.
Moses, you will not bring down the ICC.
No. Start thinking of another agenda. You know, you guys have tried all the things that they have failed.
Who?
You and the people who think like you.
No, so I believe in these international institutions. I don't want people to die.
It's just...
let me tell you.
And I don't think Moses wants people to die. We have to end it there. Time is up. But it's very interesting to see what will become of this relationship. I thank you both for your views. Moses Kuria, Professor Edward Kisiangani. We take a short break. I'll be back with the sports after these messages.